Well, we begin tonight's show in Senegal, where bilateral talks and deliberations have been going on for the better part of the afternoon on the second and final day of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Now, the FOCAC summit looks to find ways to further deepen cooperation between China and Africa. Now, of course, African leaders have been reacting to the speech given by Chinese President Xi Jinping, who addressed the participants on Monday via video link. Let's listen in.
La déclaration aujourd'hui du président Xi Jinping est une déclaration historique.
President Xi Jinping's statement today is historic. He mentioned some commitments that need to be highlighted. He pledged to give African countries 1 billion vaccines, which is extremely interesting, especially in this time of pandemic. Personally, I can say that my country has received 1.5 million vaccines from our Chinese friends, and they are promising more. Currently, we are at 25% of people vaccinated, and we intend to go further. And our Chinese friends have been the most generous with us so far.
We have been saying that China supports the Central African Republic in various areas, namely energy development, agricultural development, and in certain training programs that it offers to the Central African population. This is a partnership that is intended to be mutually beneficial, and this is what is happening between our two countries.
Well, let's head to Dakar now and find out more about the discussions taking place on the ground from our correspondent Nick Mudimba. He joins us now. Nick, great to have you with us on tonight's show. Now, this year's summit is taking place with the backdrop of a global pandemic and, of course, its economic aftershocks. We also have an increasingly complex international environment. How is this all influencing the conversations happening this year? Well, it looks like we have lost Nick there. We'll certainly try and get him back. Oh, Nick, can you hear me now? This year's summit certainly taking place with the backdrop of a global pandemic, its economic implications, and of course, an increasingly complex international environment, Nick. So give us a sense of how that has influenced conversations on the ground.
Absolutely, Uche, and I can get you loud and clear. So basically the summit has ended an hour ago via, of course, a press conference that was held by Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and his counterpart from Senegal, Aissata Tall Sall. But the thing is, when you focus about the pandemic, it has been very catastrophic in Africa. Loss of jobs and so many negative issues affecting the continent. As you're aware, 1 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines to Africa. That is actually very huge in boosting Africa's campaign to fight the virus. And also medical personnel to be given to various countries across Africa from China. That's actually very, very big to boost the healthcare system in the continent. Something else, Uche, is that when you talk about healthcare systems in Africa, you are aware that some are very fragile. And this is something that indeed was cemented today, that indeed the facilities, all the equipment in these hospitals across the continent will be given a booster from various entities across China. The government of China will actually come in aid strong to help Africa boost its healthcare system. Something else also cemented during the FOCAC and the forum is actually that Africa now needs to get its own way of just looking at innovation, looking at how to make their own vaccines. Like when you talk about 1 billion vaccine, that means Africa and China will team up together to come up with this. Because now some countries in Africa who of course have started the plans, are already manufacturing vaccines, will be given a part China to continue doing that, and of course China on its part will come back and again boost the continent with more vaccines. So in terms of healthcare, Africa has really benefited from this. Has so many countries the pandemic.
Well, Nick, certainly we know the China-Africa partnership, it has benefited a lot from this FOCAC summit and, of course, has contributed significantly to Africa's growth. We usually see a lot of deals on the table at this summit. So what is the latest on this? Any developments this year?
Absolutely. Bilateral talks going on all through the day since morning here in Dakar, Senegal, and the deals have been actually struck. And which I can tell you, countries, Mozambique and Equatorial Guinea, all those countries, Togo, were actually in closed-door meetings with Foreign Minister Wang Yi. And this, without a doubt, so many African countries have benefited from one way or another through trade, through healthcare systems, security, and just making sure that indeed their affairs are run very well in the specific countries. So this is where China comes in. Now, China comes in to boost what already exists. But again, it's a win-win situation. Also, something else that is being pushed on the agenda that is indeed very special is people-to-people relations. Now, the cultural aspects between China and Africa has really been pushed, and this one is all about trying to boost whatever is actually existing. Look at infrastructure, look at security, and look at peace building. And I could just give you what the Foreign Minister Wang Yi said earlier, that the agenda is working together with Africa and with no interference, and upholding equity and justice, and of course in the middle of COVID-19 in Africa. And also China appreciates Africa for supporting President Xi Jinping's agenda. So all these things, Uche, is actually for the benefit of the continent, and without a doubt the continent, of course, countries within Africa will actually steer to the next level.
Right. Well, we do have to leave it there, Nick, but many thanks for that update. That, of course, is Nick Mudimba joining us there in Dakar, Senegal. Now, of course, as he mentioned, State Councillor and Foreign Minister of China, Wang Yi, also weighed in on the work that FOCAC has achieved in Africa, which he says speaks for itself.
The Forum on Africa-China Cooperation has entered its 21st year. The forum has been developing for the better. No matter where we travel in Africa, you can always hear people praising the forum. In the past 20 years, the achievements from the forum have benefited every African country and even every family. So no matter how hard some Western powers smear and slam on China-Africa cooperation, African people always have their own judgment. They know who is their friend and who has been doing the real and good things for them.
Well, let's shift focus now and head to Egypt. The country's economy grew at its quickest pace in 2 decades in the first quarter of 2021-2022 fiscal year. That is as it continued to rebound from last year's slump in activity, of course, caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, authorities announced that GDP expanded at an annual 9.8% during the first quarter. It was boosted by the recovery in the hospitality and manufacturing sectors. Well, CGTN's Yasser Hakim has the latest on those numbers.
Egypt's 20-year record economic growth has hit a record 9.8% in the July to September period, up from 0.7% in the same period last year. This is the second consecutive quarter of strong economic growth after GDP clocked in at 7.2%. Experts owe these results to government measures taken before and during the outbreak of the pandemic.
Before the COVID-19, there was a successful economic reform program in coordination with the World Bank and IMF, and this has helped sustain the Egyptian pound against the dollar and boost the foreign currency reserves. To counter the effects of the health measures during the coronavirus pandemic, there were emergency funds and initiatives from the central bank to support the manufacturing sectors, agriculture sector, the construction sector, and the travel and tourism industries.
The impact was quickly seen in the economy. All of the country's crucial sectors saw considerable growth rates. The most predominant, though, is the hospitality sector, with the fastest pace at a massive 181%, recovering from the global lockdown and travel restrictions in 2020. There were other factors as well.
There was an increase in global natural gas prices, and the government increased gas prices to raise revenues. The telecom and IT sector was a main contributor, with 16.3% growth, pushed by the aggressive digital transformation strategy by the government, in addition to the Suez Canal revenue, which has increased by 10%.
In spite of the global price hikes and supply chain shortages, the North African government has confidently forecast a 5.7% annual economic growth, up from 3.2% year-on-year, and that's above the IMF projections of 5.2%. Yes Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And Tanzania and Uganda have pledged to work on removing the non-tariff barriers to trade and explore more areas for economic cooperation. The presidents of the two East African nations made the agreement during a three-day state visit from Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni to Tanzania. Here's CGTN's Beryl Oro with more.
Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni has met his counterpart Tanzania's Samia Suluhu Hassan in Dar es Salaam. They met to strengthen cooperation in areas of investment, bilateral ties and trade opportunities. Although the trade volume between the two nations has slowly increased from $167 million in 2014 to $509 million in 2020, Tanzanian president says more needs to be done.
Kwa lengo la kuimarisha biashara kati yetu.
To improve our businesses, we have agreed to solve together non-tariff barriers. We have agreed to solve such barriers, and we have directed our ministers in charge of trade to meet in 2 months so that we can solve such barriers. As you can remember, we had the similar trade barriers with Kenya, but after directing the ministers and experts to meet, now the trade between Tanzania and Kenya has grown by 6 times. So we expect when we solve our challenges with Uganda, the business will increase more.
Tulipokwenda na kuwataka mawaziri na wataalamu wakae, sasa biashara Tanzania na Kenya imekuwa mara 6 zaidi.
Uganda is a strategic partner to Tanzania in many areas, particularly trade, security, education, agriculture and energy. In the East African region, Uganda has the second largest investment in Tanzania. So far, according to Tanzanian figures, Uganda has invested about 45 development projects worth $114 million into Tanzania.
East Africa has got everything: agriculture, minerals, forests, oil, gas, etc. Once the environmental concerns are addressed, the sky is the limit.
Uganda and Tanzania's friendly relations date back to the 1960s when the two countries gained their independence. They plan to increase such development efforts in order to empower their nations. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
And now a look at our corporate headlines today. The African Development Bank has postponed its investment forum that was scheduled to start in Cote d'Ivoire on Wednesday. Now, the bank says the decision comes amid health concerns and travel restrictions due to the Omicron coronavirus variant. It also adds that conversations around the funding of projects is set to continue behind the scenes. And the South Africa Revenue Service says it will appeal a ruling ordering it to provide the media with former President Jacob Zuma's tax records. This comes after the Pretoria High Court ordered the tax agency to supply 2 media companies with 8 years of Zuma's personal tax records in the public interest. In its appeal, SARS had initially refused to share Zuma's tax records with the media, citing taxpayer confidentiality. And Royal Dutch Shell is contemplating a return to Libya with plans to develop new oil and gas fields and infrastructure. Now, this comes a decade after exiting the North African country due to civil unrest. The plan marks a rare new oil and gas foray by the energy major as it seeks to cut fossil fuel investment and also slash greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, EasyJet has seen some weakening in its bookings, and that's amid concern about the new COVID variant. Its CEO says it is too early to assess what the full impact might be. He also says bookings for next summer were largely unaffected, with strong pent-up demand likely to see a return close to 2019 pre-pandemic levels. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, but still to come on the show. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa kickstarts his West African tour, and Egypt halts flights to several Southern African nations.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business. Only on CGTN.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
The little tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is kicking off his week-long West African tour in Nigeria. He's also scheduled to visit Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana and Senegal as well during that tour. Now, Ramaphosa says he wants to reinforce South Africa's bilateral relations and also strengthen partnerships directed at African development and cooperation as well. Now, of course, he's just landed in Nigeria, and let's get the latest from the ground. Phili Hazard joins us now in Abuja. Great to have you with us, Phil. Now, of course, Nigeria and South Africa, they have quite the checkered past, including periods of tense diplomatic relations, xenophobia as well. Given that this is President Ramaphosa's first visit to Nigeria in his official capacity, what are the expectations in terms of the tone of those talks and the urgent issues on the table?
Well, thank you, Uche. Indeed, it's been 6 hours of anticipation and wait for the president of South Africa to come or touch down, for his plane to touch down in Nigeria, Abuja, actually the nation's capital. But we can confirm that he is in Nigeria at the moment. But of course, he's supposed to meet with the president behind closed doors. He's officially meeting with him on Wednesday, that's tomorrow. So in terms of his official capacity visiting the country, he visited actually in 2018, and he was president at the time, but just shortly after the former president, Jacob Zuma, resigned from office. But this is quite a big one because we're looking at post-COVID efforts that, if you look at the statements from the president before he arrived in Nigeria, he talked about how that he was coming to focus on how economies in this part of the world, South Africa and West Africa, will bounce back from the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, coincidentally, his visit as well into Nigeria marks the 10th session of the Binational Commission, which was set up 20 years ago between Nigeria and South Africa. It's one of the highest level of government-to-government talks to improve business activities and, of course, trade between both nations. Before now, I think about 2016, it used to stop at the level of the vice presidency, but it has been taken to the highest level, which is between the president of both nations. And so quite a number of discussions will go around the binational commission, what can be done to encourage trade, to ensure that the business environment is also positive or better than it is currently. And of course, one pressing issue will be talks around the COVID-19 new variant of concern, Omicron, because I mean, you know that there's been travel bans on South Africa and other African nations, and so it is expected that both leaders, foremost leaders actually of the African continent, will put their voice again on this issue to see how that they can urge the countries placing those bans to have a rethink.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about trade, because we know South Africa and Nigeria, they've remained each other's biggest trading partners on the continent. Ramaphosa says the aim of this visit is to further enhance trade and investment relationships. Lots of companies, private sector companies from South Africa and Nigeria and vice versa. So what areas then should we expect to see some new deals signed?
Yes, it is clear that we'll expect to see, I think, 5 memorandum of understandings. In fact, it is confirmed that that is on the table, but because it's a government-to-government talk, we've seen earlier on, as on Monday, a delegation led by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of South Africa, Dr. Naledi Pandor. It was a meeting between herself and Nigeria's Foreign Minister, Geoffrey Onyema. They reviewed the 5 MOUs, but not much details have been given. We expect that the details will be brought to the fore when both leaders have met, and of course they will give us some more information on that. But it is not far-fetched, the fact that discussions will definitely center around the African Free Trade Agreement. It's a market platform that is valued at over $3.4 trillion, involving 1.3 billion people on the African continent trading. And so you know that the African Free Trade Agreement cannot, or almost will not happen without the involvement of the largest economy in the top 2 biggest economies actually in Africa. That's Nigeria and South Africa. So that's why this meeting is indeed very significant, because both of them will definitely have to look at ways that they can draw up some possibilities from the African Free Trade Agreement, and also see how they can achieve the timeline of commencement of activities between both South African region and of course the West African region.
Now, I'm sure the private sector will certainly be watching those discussions closely, because the reality is the past few years have been quite tough for some of South Africa's top companies. We've seen quite a number of them closing shop in Nigeria. This year, we saw ShopRite, which is Africa's largest retailer, announcing that it will be exiting Nigeria after almost 15 years in the country. Woolworths, Mr. Price also threw in the towel. MTN and now MultiChoice having tax issues with Nigeria. So certainly Nigeria's market seems to have proven to be challenging for South African companies. What is behind that? How do you think they'll address this at this meeting?
Well, it's fair really to say that some countries have been leaving, South African companies, I beg your pardon, have been leaving the Nigerian business space. But I mean, you'll know that this is not targeted at South African countries, even if we've seen some certain instances in the past, especially in 2018, for example, where there was a spat between the Nigerian government and the MTN telecommunications, where, of course, the CBN was demanding for about $8.1 billion to be repatriated to Nigeria because the telecommunications breached some foreign regulations. But then, I mean, the country is home to, Nigeria is home to over 120 companies from South Africa, and at the moment, not all of them are packing out. So that tells you that it is not targeted towards the South African companies. We have MTN, we have standard Stanbic IBTC Bank, we have the MultiChoice, which operates DSTV and GoTV platforms here in Nigeria. We have a couple of them, the Eskom energy plant and all of that. So there are quite a number of them that are doing so well in Nigeria. What is going on is that there is a seeming challenge, dealing business-wise here in Nigeria. You're looking at currency fluctuations, you're looking at logistic challenges, maybe at the ports, duties, levies, and all of that. I mean, you're looking at insecurity, and on these are challenges that are faced not just by South African companies, but all, whether local or foreign companies. And that's why this meeting, definitely both leaders, is expected that they would have to look at ways that they can ease business for foreign investments, not just business activities or entrepreneurs, but foreign investors to be able to trade easily and make profit. So it is expected that the meeting with the presidents tomorrow, that's Wednesday, will address some of these issues, look into maybe easing visa restrictions for entrepreneurship purposes and all of that. So these are some of the things that are on the table, and of course we are monitoring to give you further updates on how this will impact businesses for South Africa and of course for Nigerians over in South Africa.
Well, many thanks, Phil, for that update and for your insights. That, of course, is Phili Haza joining us there in Abuja. Now, there will be many tears this festive season as holiday plans have been dashed over a new variant first identified in South Africa. Now, scientists are yet to determine the severity of the highly mutated Omicron, which has already prompted travel restrictions for several Southern African nations. There's also been chaos at airports around the world as travelers try to make their way to or from South Africa. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the latest.
Stephen Pinnock and many other UK nationals were forced to abandon their travel plans when the UK slapped travel restrictions on South Africa after the new Omicron variant.
So my friends were affected more than me because they had 24 hours to get home. I had 48 hours to get home, with the result being that if we did decide to stay, we would have to pay for a quarantine hotel on arrival. So that would be 10 days in a hotel. It was £2,200 sterling. So obviously we've just budgeted for this holiday and for the wedding for half of that.
Pinnock and his friends were special guests at a wedding but were forced to leave before the function.
So we actually had a makeshift wedding on the beach with about maybe a quarter of the guests, a third of the guests. So just we could be part of the wedding, even though they had the actual ceremony the next day when we'd all left. So the 6 of us from Scotland and England. So we did manage to salvage something, but it was just a day of emotional tears. Didn't get any sleep that night trying to find new flights.
Chaos ensued at South African airports over the last few days as a growing list of countries followed the UK's lead.
It's completely affected me. I'm working online, so of course you planificate all your trip. I have to buy extra tickets. I have a flight from here, and now I have to buy a ticket to Tanzania because apparently Tanzania is done rejecting like the other countries, and then book another flight to Dubai, and then Dubai to Portugal, all by expenses.
From those that have been stranded, we managed to get quite a few of them back on their flights back home. And of course, we are just waiting on more information around repatriation. We are also engaging with the consular corps and the embassies to make sure that we get a better snapshot of who of their citizens are still in the country.
Travel agents have had their hands full with disappointed South Africans having their holidays ruined.
We had a lot of customers who had booked for November and December, obviously to reunite with family and go on holiday. They hadn't seen family for a very long time. So a lot of disappointment all around. As you may know, the UK now has us on that red list, and flights will resume this week, into the UK, but it's only for citizens and for residents of the UK who will now need to enter a quarantine facility for 10 days.
The UK is one of South Africa's key markets for inbound and outbound travellers. High-level talks are underway to have restrictions relaxed.
We are hoping and really, really praying that all the advocating that's going on from a regulatory point of view, that we have a voice in terms of this being a knee-jerk reaction.
South Africa has not tightened restrictions, but hopes for a recovery in the tourism sector have been severely dashed. Holiday cancellations in just a few days have cost the industry at least $60 million as scientists scramble to determine the risk of the new variant Omicron. Julie Shara, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Meanwhile, Egypt's cabinet has halted direct flights between the North African nation and 7 African countries. The government says this measure aims to contain the entry and the spread of the new coronavirus variant Omicron. Now, following the discovery of the new variant, Egypt has moved to include children aged between 12 to 15 in its ongoing vaccinations. Here's CGTN's Adele El Maroui with the details.
Following the news about the discovery of the new Omicron variant, Egypt has terminated all direct flights linking it with 7 African countries. The viral containment move will see travel from South Africa, Lesotho, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Namibia and Eswatini halted. Although the step has been widely welcomed, some experts believe it might not be effective.
If it's actually just a couple of days, it will be very effective to close the borders and shut down the flights. But maybe it's actually spreading for a few weeks or months now. So if so, it will not going to be that effective. If it's actually spreading like the Delta variant, closing the borders will not going to be that effective, especially that we can see now cases in Asia, we can see a lot of cases in Europe and actually in the occupied lands as well.
Besides the travel curbs affecting the 7 countries, all other flights to and from Egypt will continue normally. So far, Cairo has not reported any cases of the new Omicron variant. There are other countries that have, however, reported 2 cases of people who allegedly passed through Egypt.
I'm not going to be surprised if we do have cases, since it's actually the world is very open in terms of borders right now. A lot of cases are actually spreading worldwide. We are doing in Egypt a lot of gene sequencing to identify variants and the mutation in the virus.
Egyptian experts have warned that any cases of the new variant will be a setback for the country that has made strides in containing the coronavirus. Egypt has been consistently opening up social life, but some public health experts are advising people to now observe social distancing and to also wear face masks even when in open areas.
The terrifying part of the story is that we don't really know about its epidemiology clearly, so can equip the people with the proper messages for protection. Whether the new variants of the virus have variated in the corona spikes, which is going to be very, very serious, because these spikes are the domain of the different varieties of the vaccines currently being used worldwide. This is one very important issue. It's going to be revealed within a couple of weeks and maximum after 4 weeks.
The Egyptian flight ban was made while Cairo hosted the Confederation of African Football's General Assembly, a meeting that brought together football delegations from all of Africa's 54 nations.
Although the efficacy of existing vaccines against the new variant is not clear yet, the Egyptian government decided to expand its inoculation campaign. Starting the 1st of December, for the first time, it will allow children 12 to 15 to get COVID-19 vaccines to reach its 40% of the population target before the year ends. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still to come on the show. Germany's unemployment rate unexpectedly drops in November. And the White House discusses the global supply chain crisis with U.S. retailers.
Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
American holding guns.
Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
The activity, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
And now let's recap the headlines this hour. Bilateral talks have been going on for the better part of the afternoon on the second and final day of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. Now, the FOCAC summit looks to find ways to further deepen the working relationship between China and Africa. And security forces in Sudan deployed tear gas on tens of thousands of protesters who gathered in the capital Khartoum to oppose military rule. Now, heavily armed police took to central Khartoum, where protesters planned to march on the presidential palace. The committees and political parties in Sudan are opposed to the deal, which was struck between the military and Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, who was reinstated as part of that deal. And the Ugandan army says it has launched joint air and artillery strikes with Congolese forces against rebels in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the attack against camps of the Allied Democratic Forces comes 2 weeks after twin bomb blasts rocked the Ugandan capital, Kampala. And that's a recap of other headlines of this hour. And let's now turn our attention to international news. Germany's unemployment rate fell from 5.4% to 5.3% in November. And this comes amid a recovery on the job market despite soaring COVID-19 cases in the country. The Federal Labor Agency says the federal government needs to prepare legislation for a general vaccination requirement in order to ensure a faster recovery of the job market.
The current corona situation in Germany is now really worrying. However, there has been barely any impact on the labor market so far. That's typical for November. The recovery of recent months has continued, but honestly, no one knows what the future holds at the moment. Unemployment and unemployment fell sharply in November. Employment continued on its growth course. Demand from companies for new staff also increased again. Notifications of short-time working are increasing. In addition to supply bottlenecks in industry, the current containment measures are also having an impact, and we expect to face a really severe winter.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., leading retailers were back at the White House on Monday. They were asking for help to ease the global supply chain crisis. Of course, Cyber Monday has become a critical sales date just after the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, with shoppers setting records in recent years. But retailers are worried the pandemic's impact on supply chains is now contributing to only modest growth this year. CGTN's Owen Fairclough with more.
US retailers should be celebrating what's on course to be a record-breaking holiday shopping season. Instead, the leaders of some of the biggest names spent Cyber Monday, typically the biggest single day for online sales, at the White House asking for help.
Our inventory levels are up more than 10%. So while we're all concerned about the supply chain, we have more inventory than we did a year ago and have the inventory that we need to be able to support the business.
If the overall numbers look healthy, there's concern that years of explosive sales growth will slow sharply this year despite the economy recovering from the pandemic.
Online shoppers during this holiday season are discovering that many items are out of stock, so they're chasing fewer goods and fewer discounts while navigating inflated prices. All of this is evidence of a global supply chain crisis that's hitting consumers in the pocket and retailers during their most critical sales period of the year. So it's forced the White House to take action.
President Biden has already earmarked some $17 billion to upgrade ports so they can accommodate bigger container ships and work more efficiently to eliminate logjams. His administration is also trying to reduce reliance on global supply chains by encouraging domestic production of crucial electronics components. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
Meanwhile, Russia has seen one of its busiest years for initial public offerings in a decade. That, of course, is when a company decides to put itself on the stock market for one and all to invest. Now, doing so brings big rewards and also big risks. So why now? Well, Stuart Smith reports from Moscow.
The global economy is awash with cash. Government stimulus packages and lockdown rebounds have many businesses feeling confident. That means it's a good time for certain companies to go public. Russia's biggest IPO this year came from Fixed Price. Its chain of discount stores sell slash-price items, comfortable territory for foreign investors.
Investors from all over the globe, they are very well familiar with companies like us because there are many good precedents and examples of this business model and in the US, in Canada, and in some Western countries. Last year was, as we all remember, a truly extraordinary year with lockdowns, closures, etc., etc. So as we were able to deliver strong growth, robust margins, and expanded our business in general, we last year demonstrated and proved to investors how robust our company, our business model is.
Listing on the stock market is seen as a milestone for a company. It's a way that people who privately invested can cash out and is one way for companies to get more cash in. Businesses can choose to list on one or multiple exchanges, such as the London or New York Stock Exchange. In Russia, the largest is the Moscow Exchange.
When people think of Russia, they traditionally think about metals and mining, oil and gas. And what's interesting that this wave of IPOs, this new wave of companies that tap capital markets this year, they're mostly from new economy, technology stocks, healthcare, sort of technology, retail type of businesses.
There are signs, though, that this wave of IPOs is coming to an end. In November, 2 mega IPOs were postponed, citing less than favourable market conditions.
Unless you're an investor in one of these companies, you're unlikely to notice a change to your wealth. But increasingly more Russians are investing in stocks and shares, from around 5% in 2018 investing to more than a third today. There's been a huge jump, and for those investors, more choice means more opportunity, but also more risk as well. Stuart Smith, CGTN, Moscow.
Now, in China, home organizer has emerged as one of the country's or 2021's most popular jobs, where there's more than 7,000 licensed consultants. They're hired to declutter homes, especially closets. And our reporter Huang Fei lifts the curtains on this $15 million industry.
For a closet therapist, a typical day on the job looks like this. A battle against clutter, turning sloppy stacks into neat color gradients.
I first came across tidying from short videos on social media. I like tidying and organizing things at home, so I thought why not try it out as a freelance gig. I've been doing this for a few months, and I'm still learning.
Lo Jiahua is a minority in a booming industry where 95% of the workforce are women. But he says men have plenty to offer, and he's no exception.
Guys can do more heavy lifting. I just think being young is about exploring. That's how you find out what you're really good at.
Today, the team is servicing this 5-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Guangzhou. Tang Huiting owns the flat.
Because I sell apartments for a living, I visited many homes and have seen firsthand how different the same place can feel when it's organized. I want my home to be comfortable, but I'm too busy to tidy up, so I hired professionals.
The organizers charge by the width of the closets and cabinets. Each meter serviced costs about $150. Tang spent roughly $5,000 to have her entire home organized over several sessions.
It's amazing that even months later, if I can't find something, I can just text the organizers and they'll tell me which drawer or exact spot to look.
The tidying craze began years ago, with Japanese author Marie Kondo first introducing the idea of discarding items in our home that don't spark joy. Her philosophy triggered a worldwide home organizing spree in 2019 and even led to a spike in charity shop donations and street dumping in Australia. But Chinese organizers say the KonMari way may not translate well everywhere.
Chinese tradition teaches us it's a virtue to be thrifty and diligent. If you ask clients to toss things because they don't get used often, they may get offended. They'll think, I don't need to pay you to tell me what's rubbish in my house. An organizer is like a doctor for your space. We diagnose what's causing clutters and prescribe the right treatment.
Lin teaches a certifying course at the LCD Academy, which claims to have taught 90% of accredited consultants in China. The decluttering profession has grown in sync with the rise of consumerism and the amount of stuff we own. For a trained consultant, the goal is not actually about being tidy, but more about being organized. So part of their job is educating clients and introducing ways to prevent clutter from even accumulating in the first place. I've forgotten how to do this already. That's a failed sample. Moving on. With good understandings of colors, design, and luxury items, seasoned professionals can rake in 6-figure salaries a year. It's an appealing option for those looking to start a business with low overhead and flexible hours. But it comes with challenges too.
The biggest challenge I've faced is finding a like-minded partner. It's been 2 years since I left my advertising job to start this business. My time and energy is limited, so I feel quite lonely sometimes. There's a shortage of experienced organizers because after graduating these courses, few people actually pursue it as a career. It's hard to find clients in the beginning. So many people just give up and go back to their old jobs.
According to a 2020 survey in China, 90% of the participants admitted to having hoarding tendencies. And thanks to rising incomes and the ubiquity of online shopping, the number of people needing organizing services is growing 20% each year in some Chinese cities. For those already invested in the career, it's the soothing joy of change that validates their work. Huang Fei, CGTN, Guangzhou.
And on that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices tumbling more than 3%, and that's after Moderna's CEO cast some doubt on the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines against the Omicron coronavirus variant. He did spook financial markets and, of course, added to those worries about oil demand. Meanwhile, gold prices, on the other hand, on the rise as volatility returned to global markets, and, of course, fresh concerns over the Omicron variant pushed investors out of perceived riskier assets such as stocks and to safe havens like gold. Well, let's head into a short break now. Do stay with us. We'll be right back.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Juba,
Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, the Ugandan President, Yoweri Museveni, says the construction of the East African crude oil pipeline will help to strengthen the East African region's political and economic integration. The statement was made during a 3-day visit to Tanzania, where he attended an oil and gas symposium and also held bilateral talks with his Tanzanian counterpart, Samia Suluhu Hassan. Here's CGTN's Isaac Lukando with the details.
Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni touched down in Tanzania to a warm reception and attended an oil and gas symposium. High on the agenda were efforts to maximize the benefits of a $3.5 billion oil pipeline connecting Uganda's oil fields to Tanzania's port of Tanga. Preliminary agreements for the construction of the 1,445-kilometer pipeline were signed in April this year. President Museveni believes high-value projects like this one hold the key to a prosperous East Africa.
East Africa has got everything: agriculture, minerals, forests, oil, gas, etc. Once the environmental concerns are addressed, the sky is the limit.
Tanzanian exports to Uganda have surged this year. In June, they were 43% higher than the year before, increasing concerns of a trade imbalance between the two nations. In addition to the oil pipeline, President Samia Suluhu Hassan says she wants to see more trade between the two countries.
We ought to talk about investments in other areas in order to complement the oil business. In terms of investment, Tanzania and Uganda have made strides, but we are in agreement that we've not done well enough
and that more efforts are needed.
The oil pipeline project is expected to see an increase of more than 60% in foreign direct investment to both Uganda and Tanzania during the construction phase alone. It is expected to create some 5,000 jobs directly and 20,000 others indirectly.
The East African oil pipeline project has attracted growing criticism over the last 2 years, with some arguing that the project carries significant environmental and social risks. However, leaders of the two countries maintain that the project is not only sound, but also has extensive benefits for their people.
To boost trade between the two nations, Tanzania says it will now buy sugar from Uganda. The government says access to work permits has also been simplified to accelerate cross-border investments.
Our existing borders were set by colonialists for administration purposes. We are now redefining them through oil and gas pipelines, electricity, and even industries. These are the new frontiers. Business people should therefore be free to move between our two countries.
Oil from Uganda is expected to begin flowing through the pipeline into Tanzania in 2025. Leaders of both nations hope that when that happens, their citizens will be able to reap the benefits. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, before we leave you today, here's a quick look at Africa's currencies. Now, of course, most emerging market currencies dipped today on doubts over how effective the COVID-19 vaccines are against that new variant. South Africa's rand dipped as much as 0.1%, retreating early as we saw caution lingering in markets. At some point, it even closed 0.46% weaker than its previous close. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling continues to touch record lows against the dollar. It currently hovers at around 112 shillings against the dollar. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.